In 1999, as the century approached its uneasy conclusion, a small, unassuming film appeared that seemed, at first glance, almost deliberately modest. Office Space did not announce itself as a defining work of its era. It arrived quietly, without spectacle, without stars designed to dominate the box office. Yet beneath its calm surface, it carried a remarkably precise portrait of modern discontent, one that would grow sharper with time rather than fade. The world it depicted was not futuristic, nor nostalgic in the traditional sense. It was painfully familiar. Cubicles stretched in neat rows, fluorescent lights hummed without warmth, and time itself appeared to slow to a mechanical crawl. This was not the heroic workplace of earlier cinema, where ambition led to triumph or moral clarity. It was a place defined by repetition, by procedures that existed solely to justify themselves, and by a creeping sense that meaning had been replaced by maintenance. At the center of this environment stood Peter Gibbons, a man not broken by tragedy but worn down by routine. His dissatisfaction was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet, internal, and deeply recognizable. He did not hate his job in an explosive way. He simply felt erased by it. That distinction is crucial to understanding the film's tone. Office Space is not about rebellion born of anger, but about withdrawal born of exhaustion. The timing of the film's release was significant. The late 1990s were often presented as a period of economic confidence, driven by technology and corporate growth. Yet beneath that optimism existed a growing unease. Work was becoming more abstract, more procedural, and less connected to tangible outcomes. People spent long hours managing information rather than creating something they could see or touch. Office Space captured this shift with remarkable clarity. The office itself functions almost as a character. It is not hostile in an obvious way. No one is openly cruel. Instead, the environment suffocates through politeness and policy. Requests are framed as suggestions. Authority hides behind memos. Accountability dissolves into process. This subtlety is what makes the satire effective. The film does not exaggerate cruelty, it exaggerates indifference. One of the most quietly unsettling aspects of the story is how little villainy it requires. There is no singular antagonist. Management is not evil, merely detached. Rules are not malicious, merely pointless. The system sustains itself without intent. This absence of clear malice suggests something more troubling, that modern frustration often has no face to confront, no one to blame. Mike Judge's direction reflects this understanding. The camera rarely draws attention to itself. Shots are composed cleanly, almost clinically, mirroring the emotional flatness of the workplace. There is no visual chaos, no dramatic lighting to signal tension. Everything appears orderly, which only deepens the sense of confinement. The world looks functional yet feels empty. The humor of Office Space emerges not from jokes layered on top of the setting, but from the setting itself. Conversations repeat, language becomes ritualistic, and individuality is smoothed down by corporate expectations. The laughter that follows is often uncomfortable, because it arises from recognition rather than surprise. The audience does not laugh because something is absurd. They laugh because it is accurate. Peter's transformation, such as it is, does not follow a traditional arc of self-improvement. He does not become more ambitious or more successful. Instead, he becomes indifferent. This shift is not portrayed as enlightenment, but as relief. By no longer caring, he frees himself from the emotional toll of constant performance. The film treats this detachment neither as heroic nor irresponsible. It presents it as a coping mechanism. This perspective distinguishes Office Space from earlier workplace comedies. Rather than celebrating rebellion or ambition, it questions the value of engagement itself when engagement produces no meaning. The film suggests that disengagement may be a rational response to systems that do not reward care. This idea, quietly radical at the time, would resonate more strongly as work became increasingly abstract in the decades that followed. Supporting characters deepen this portrait without ever overwhelming it. Each represents a different response to the same environment. Some cling to rules, some retreat into silence, and others perform enthusiasm as a survival strategy. None are portrayed with cruelty. The film observes them with a steady, almost compassionate eye, acknowledging that everyone is adapting in the way they know how. The dialogue is carefully calibrated. Characters speak in corporate language that feels rehearsed rather than spontaneous. Phrases repeat with slight variations, creating a rhythm that mimics workplace communication. This repetition is not accidental. It reflects how language itself becomes a tool of containment, smoothing over dissatisfaction without addressing it. Sound design plays a subtle role in reinforcing this mood. The constant background noise of machinery, printers, and office equipment creates an atmosphere of low-level tension. Silence is rare, and when it appears, it feels almost intrusive. The environment never fully releases its hold on the characters, even in moments meant to be neutral. What often goes unnoticed is how restrained the film is emotionally. It never instructs the audience how to feel. It does not ask for outrage or sympathy. It simply presents a situation and allows recognition to do the work. This restraint is what gives the film its longevity. It trusts the viewer, particularly one with lived experience, to fill in the emotional gaps. At the time of its release, Office Space struggled to find its audience. Its tone was too quiet, too specific, and too unglamorous to command immediate attention. Yet as years passed, its reputation grew. Viewers returned to it not for escapism, but for validation. It articulated feelings that had been difficult to name. The film's production history reflects its modest ambitions. It was not designed as a major cultural statement. Its creator approached the material with a clear understanding of the environment he was depicting, drawn from personal observation rather than ideological intent. This grounded perspective allowed the satire to remain precise rather than exaggerated. What emerges in these early movements of the story is a portrait of modern life stripped of illusion. Work is not portrayed as a path to identity, nor as a source of dignity. It is presented as a structure that demands participation without offering meaning in return. The film does not argue against work itself, but against the emptiness that arises when work loses its connection to purpose. For a mature audience revisiting Office Space, the experience often feels different than it once did. What may have seemed exaggerated now feels understated. What once appeared comedic now carries a quiet melancholy. Time has not dulled the film's observations, it has sharpened them. In its opening passages, Office Space establishes a world where dissatisfaction is normalized and resistance is muted. It invites the viewer not to laugh loudly, but to nod in recognition. And in doing so, it lays the foundation for a story that is less about rebellion than about awareness. About the moment when one realizes that exhaustion itself can be a form of clarity. As the story progresses, Office Space widens its lens without losing its intimacy, revealing that Peter's dissatisfaction is not an anomaly but a shared condition. The office becomes a quiet ecosystem of coping strategies, each employee negotiating the same emptiness in a different way. Some comply meticulously, others withdraw, and a few cling to minor rituals as if they might restore a sense of control. The film observes these behaviors without judgment, allowing their quiet desperation to speak for itself. The corporate structure surrounding Peter is deliberately impersonal. Authority is fragmented, dispersed through procedures rather than personalities. Requests arrive through layers of management that feel interchangeable, their language softened to the point of absurdity. This diffusion of responsibility is central to the film's critique. No one appears to be making decisions, yet decisions are constantly enforced. The result is a system that governs without acknowledging its own agency. Peter's disengagement accelerates after his brief encounter with a promise of self-improvement that collapses almost immediately. What follows is not a journey toward ambition, but toward honesty. He stops pretending to care, and in doing so, he disrupts the unspoken contract of the workplace. His calm refusal to perform enthusiasm exposes how much of office life depends on shared pretense. The film treats this exposure not as triumph, but as an unsettling relief. This shift creates a subtle inversion. As Peter becomes more indifferent, he is paradoxically rewarded. His lack of anxiety is mistaken for confidence, his detachment for leadership potential. This irony lies at the heart of the film's quiet satire. It suggests that success within such systems may have less to do with competence or commitment than with the ability to remain emotionally untouched by their demands. Around him, other characters embody the cost of that emotional investment. Some are consumed by trivial responsibilities elevated to unreasonable importance. Others are rendered nearly invisible, their contributions unnoticed and their presence barely acknowledged. The film lingers on these figures with a gentleness that prevents mockery. Their frustration is not exaggerated, it is normalized, absorbed into the rhythm of daily routine. The office's rituals reinforce this normalization. Meetings proceed without purpose, conversations circle familiar phrases, and policies multiply without clarity. These rituals are not framed as chaotic, but as orderly to the point of paralysis. The structure functions yet produces nothing of meaning. This contradiction is never explained, it is simply presented as a condition of modern work. Visually, the film continues to emphasize uniformity. Cubicles repeat endlessly, corridors lead nowhere, and the color palette remains muted. There is no visual escape within the frame. Even moments outside the office carry its imprint, suggesting that work has extended beyond physical boundaries into thought itself. The film quietly acknowledges how labor can colonize inner life, leaving little room for reflection. The humor deepens as it grows more observational. Scenes unfold with deliberate pacing, allowing discomfort to accumulate. Punchlines are rarely isolated. They emerge from prolonged exposure to situations that resist resolution. The laughter that follows is often tinged with recognition, a response shaped by experience rather than surprise. Peter's interactions with management highlight the film's understanding of power as performance. Authority figures speak in reassuring tones while enforcing arbitrary standards. Their politeness masks an inability to engage meaningfully with the individuals beneath them. The film does not portray them as villains, but as participants in the same system, insulated by position rather than intention. This insulation creates a peculiar emotional distance. Conflicts never escalate into confrontation, they dissipate into procedure. When mistakes occur, responsibility is deferred, reassigned, or ignored. The absence of accountability is not dramatic, it is routine. The film suggests that this routine erosion of agency may be more damaging than overt hostility. The soundtrack, sparingly used, reinforces the film's tone of quiet alienation. Music appears not to heighten emotion but to underline mood. It does not dictate how the viewer should feel, it simply accompanies the environment, reinforcing the sense that emotional expression has been subdued by repetition. One of the film's more revealing choices is its refusal to frame Peter's disengagement as moral failure. He is not condemned for his indifference nor celebrated for it. The film treats his behavior as a response rather than a rebellion. This neutrality allows the audience to consider the broader question of what responsibility looks like within systems that offer little meaning in return. The narrative gradually makes clear that dissatisfaction is not caused by a single injustice, but by accumulation. Small indignities, repeated daily, erode motivation more effectively than any singular betrayal. The film's attention to these details gives it its enduring precision. It understands that modern exhaustion often arrives quietly, disguised as routine. Secondary characters continue to populate the story with understated clarity. Each one reflects a different accommodation to the same environment. Some invest fully, believing that compliance will eventually yield recognition. Others retreat into silence, protecting themselves by minimizing engagement. The film does not privilege one response over another, it simply shows the consequences of each. The absence of aspiration becomes increasingly pronounced. Advancement exists, but it lacks narrative weight. Promotions are discussed without excitement, success without satisfaction. The traditional promise that work leads to fulfillment is quietly dismantled, replaced by a reality where progress feels abstract and rewards are detached from effort. The film's structure mirrors this thematic drift. Scenes do not build toward a clear objective, they accumulate impressions. Time feels suspended, marked by routine rather than development. This temporal flattening reinforces the sense that days blur together, distinguished only by minor variations in procedure. What emerges is a portrait of labor stripped of its mythology. Work is not heroic, nor is it inherently degrading. It is simply present, occupying space and demanding attention. The film's critique lies not in condemning work, but in exposing what happens when it loses its connection to purpose and becomes an end in itself. As office space moves forward, it becomes less about individual dissatisfaction and more about collective resignation. The characters share an understanding they rarely articulate, that their efforts sustain a system indifferent to their well-being. This shared awareness creates a quiet solidarity, unspoken but deeply felt. For viewers revisiting the film years later, this section often resonates with unexpected clarity. What once felt exaggerated now feels restrained. The language, the rituals, the emotional distance all appear familiar. Time has not softened the film's observations, it has confirmed them. The film continues to resist the urge to explain or instruct. It does not propose solutions, nor does it offer redemption through ambition or rebellion. As Office Space moves into its later passages, the film subtly shifts from observation to implication, suggesting that prolonged disengagement inevitably leads to consequence. Peter's indifference, initially a private relief, begins to alter the balance of his surroundings. By stepping outside the unspoken rituals of the workplace, he exposes how fragile those rituals truly are. The office continues to function, but its logic appears increasingly hollow once someone refuses to perform belief. This refusal creates an unusual tension. Peter is no longer resisting, he is opting out. That distinction matters. Resistance implies confrontation, but opting out simply withdraws energy. The film understands that modern systems often depend less on enforcement than on participation. When participation fades, authority struggles to reassert itself. The result is not chaos but confusion, an administrative uncertainty that reveals how little substance exists beneath procedure. Around him, the consequences of constant compliance become clearer. The characters who continue to invest emotionally in the system do not find relief. Instead, their attachment deepens their frustration. The film presents this dynamic with restraint, allowing the contrast to emerge naturally. Where Peter becomes lighter, others grow heavier. Where he stops explaining himself, they accumulate explanations that lead nowhere. One of the film's most incisive insights is how it treats responsibility. Tasks are distributed, monitored, and documented, yet no one appears responsible for outcomes. Accountability has been absorbed by process. This diffusion creates a peculiar moral vacuum. When something goes wrong, there is no outrage, only paperwork. The film does not dramatize this failure. It normalizes it, showing how such conditions become routine. Visually, the environment remains unchanged, reinforcing the idea that transformation does not always announce itself through spectacle. The same cubicles, the same corridors, the same muted palette persist. What changes is the viewer's perception. The longer one remains in this space, the more artificial its order appears. The film allows familiarity to curdle into unease, trusting time rather than emphasis to make its point. Peter's growing honesty brings him into contact with the contradictions of corporate evaluation. His lack of visible engagement is misread as clarity. His refusal to participate in anxiety is interpreted as competence. This inversion is presented without exaggeration, suggesting that the metrics used to assess value may be fundamentally misaligned with actual contribution. The film never states this explicitly, it allows the irony to settle quietly. This misalignment extends beyond individual assessment to the broader culture of work. Success appears detached from effort, and failure disconnected from intention. The characters navigate this landscape by adjusting behavior rather than belief. Some double down on compliance, others retreat further into invisibility. The film observes these adaptations with empathy, recognizing that survival often requires compromise. Sound and silence continue to shape the film's emotional texture. The persistent hum of machinery underscores the sense that work never truly pauses. Even moments meant to be personal are infiltrated by the language and rhythm of the office. The absence of genuine quiet becomes its own form of pressure, a reminder that the system occupies space even when unseen. As the narrative unfolds, the idea of meaning becomes increasingly central. Characters speak often but say little of substance. Conversations are filled with procedural language that avoids commitment. This linguistic emptiness reflects a deeper absence. Work has become something to manage rather than inhabit. The film suggests that when language loses specificity, purpose soon follows. The humor during this phase becomes more pointed, though never cruel. It arises from the contrast between intention and effect, between what characters believe they are doing and what actually occurs. The laughter is subdued, often arriving a moment late as recognition rather than reaction. This timing gives the comedy its maturity, aligning it more closely with reflection than entertainment. The film also begins to hint at consequences beyond the workplace. Peter's detachment affects how he moves through the world outside the office. He becomes more present, more direct, less encumbered by internal negotiation. This shift is not framed as liberation, but as recalibration. He has not discovered meaning. He has simply stopped pretending where it does not exist. What distinguishes Office Space at this stage is its refusal to moralize this recalibration. The film does not suggest that disengagement is virtuous or that commitment is foolish. It presents both as responses to an environment that offers limited returns. The responsibility for dissatisfaction is not placed on individuals, but on systems that conflate productivity with purpose. Secondary characters continue to reinforce this theme through their quiet endurance. Some accept their invisibility as protection, others as defeat. The film does not elevate one response over another. Instead, it acknowledges that adaptation often carries a personal cost. The absence of judgment allows the audience to project their own experiences onto the narrative without resistance. Time within the film feels increasingly abstract. Days blur together, marked by routine rather than progression. This temporal flattening mirrors the emotional state of the characters, for whom effort does not lead to discernible change. The film captures this sensation with precision, avoiding montage or shorthand. It allows repetition to speak for itself. What emerges is a meditation on inertia. Systems continue because they have momentum, not because they serve a purpose. Individuals continue because stopping feels riskier than enduring. The film does not dramatize this inertia, it normalizes it, suggesting that the most powerful forces in modern life are often the least visible. The cultural moment of the late 1990s lingers beneath the surface of these observations. Technology promised efficiency but delivered abstraction. Work became cleaner, quieter, and more distant from tangible outcome. Office Space captured this transition at an early stage, before its implications were fully understood. Its restraint now reads as foresight. As the narrative advances, the possibility of rupture begins to take shape, not as rebellion but as inevitability. When systems depend entirely on participation, withdrawal becomes destabilizing. The film approaches this idea cautiously, never announcing a turning point. It allows the pressure to accumulate, trusting the audience to sense the shift. This approach gives the story a measured tension. Nothing dramatic occurs, yet everything feels slightly off balance. The viewer becomes aware that the status quo cannot sustain itself indefinitely, not because of malice or error, but because it lacks meaning. The film frames this realization as quiet and unsettling rather than explosive. For a mature audience, this section often resonates most strongly. It reflects a stage of life where disillusionment is not shocking but familiar. The questions raised are not abstract. They are lived. The film's refusal to dramatize them makes them more credible, more difficult to dismiss. As Office Space reaches its final movement, the film settles into a tone that is neither triumphant nor tragic, but quietly reflective. The world it has constructed does not implode, nor does it offer redemption through grand gestures. Instead, it reveals something subtler and more enduring, the realization that escape from emptiness does not always arrive as transformation, but sometimes as reorientation. Peter's journey concludes without spectacle. He does not overthrow the system, nor does he articulate a philosophy to replace it. What he achieves is more modest and perhaps more honest. He steps away from abstraction and toward something tangible. The film treats this shift not as victory but as relief, a re-entry into a rhythm of life where effort produces visible result. The contrast is not ideological, it is sensory. What matters is not meaning proclaimed but meaning felt. This resolution reflects the film's broader understanding of work as experience rather than identity. The problem was never labor itself, but labor severed from consequence. By moving toward a task grounded in physical presence, Peter does not reject responsibility. He reclaims it. The film suggests that dignity emerges not from ambition or rebellion, but from alignment between action and outcome. Crucially, the film does not present this shift as universally applicable. It does not argue that fulfillment lies in simplicity or manual labor. It simply acknowledges that the modern workplace as depicted had failed to provide Peter with coherence. His choice is personal, not prescriptive. This restraint preserves the film's credibility, allowing it to resonate without instructing. The fate of the office itself is handled with characteristic understatement. There is no reckoning, no institutional awakening. The system continues, largely unaffected by individual departures. This is one of the film's most sobering insights. Structures built on process rather than purpose are resilient precisely because they absorb loss without reflection. The absence of consequence reinforces the film's quiet critique. Supporting characters remain suspended in ambiguity. Their futures are neither condemned nor redeemed. The film resists the temptation to resolve their arcs neatly, honoring the reality that most lives do not conclude with clarity. This openness allows the audience to imagine continuation rather than closure, reinforcing the film's commitment to realism over narrative comfort. The final tone is not cynical but cautious. Office Space does not declare modern work meaningless. It questions the conditions under which meaning is expected to appear. It recognizes that fulfillment cannot be engineered through policy or procedure alone. It must be experienced, often outside the frameworks designed to manage productivity. Visually, the film maintains its composure to the end. There is no shift toward dramatic contrast or heightened emotion. The camera remains steady, observant, almost detached. This consistency reinforces the sense that what has changed is not the world but perspective. The environment remains the same, the relationship to it has altered. Sound and silence continue to carry weight. The hum of machinery fades not into triumph but into calm. The absence of noise is not celebrated, it is simply present. The film understands that peace often arrives quietly without announcement. This subtlety allows the ending to feel earned rather than imposed. In retrospect, the film's legacy lies in its refusal to exaggerate. What might have been a broad satire becomes, instead, a precise document of emotional fatigue. Its humor does not age because it is not anchored to trends or references. It is rooted in structure, language, and experience. The frustrations it depicts persist because the conditions that produce them persist. For audiences revisiting Office Space later in life, the film often feels more reflective than comedic. The laughter is gentler, tinged with recognition. What once seemed exaggerated now appears restrained. Time has transformed the film from a cult comedy into a quiet chronicle of modern labor. The film's enduring relevance is not accidental. It identified a shift in how work was experienced at the threshold of a new century. As jobs became increasingly abstract, mediated by screens and systems, the distance between effort and outcome widened. Office Space captured that distance before it became normalized. Importantly, the film does not romanticize escape. Peter's resolution is not framed as enlightenment. It is practical, imperfect, and limited. The film respects the complexity of change, acknowledging that relief does not equal fulfillment, and that clarity does not guarantee permanence. This measured ending reinforces the film's central insight, that dissatisfaction is not always a problem to be solved, but a signal to be interpreted. The film listens to that signal without panic, allowing it to guide rather than dictate. This patience gives the narrative its depth. The absence of moral judgment is one of the film's greatest strengths. It does not shame those who remain, nor does it glorify those who leave. It recognizes that survival within flawed systems often requires compromise, and that compromise carries emotional cost. The film neither condemns nor absolves, it observes. In the broader landscape of cinema, Office Space occupies a unique position. It is neither an outright protest nor a celebration of conformity. It exists in the space between, articulating the quiet unease of people who sense that something is wrong but cannot name it. This ambiguity allows the film to speak across generations. For a mature audience, its resonance often deepens with time. The jokes linger but the observations endure. The film becomes less about laughter and more about recognition. It validates feelings that are often dismissed as personal failure, revealing them instead as systemic consequence. The final impression left by Office Space is one of calm acknowledgement. It does not promise solutions, nor does it indulge despair. It accepts that modern life contains contradictions that cannot be resolved through will alone. In that acceptance lies a form of honesty rarely afforded in comedy. To rediscover the film today is to encounter a work that understood its subject with clarity and restraint. It did not shout its critique. It whispered it, trusting that those who needed to hear it would recognize themselves in its quiet moments. Office Space endures because it speaks to an experience that remains unresolved. Work continues to shape identity, time, and emotional energy. Systems continue to operate without reflection. Individuals continue to adapt in ways both creative and costly. The film does not claim to change this reality. It simply gives it form. And in doing so, it offers something quietly powerful: the assurance that feeling disconnected is not a personal failure, but a shared condition. That recognition, delivered without bitterness or exaggeration, is the film's lasting gift. It leaves the viewer not with answers but with clarity, and with the understanding that sometimes, seeing the system clearly is the first step toward reclaiming oneself within it or beyond it. In that quiet clarity, Office Space finds its enduring voice, speaking softly across time to those who recognize its world not as satire, but as memory.